Hello, welcome back. Part 2 Exodus Review. Alright, let's start here. This is a map, and this shows up top where it says Goshen, Ramesses. That's where Israel was. And at the time of the Exodus, they could have went the way of the Philistines, but there was war, and there were other reasons, I'm sure, why God said, we're not going to take you that way, and God took Israel the long way. And the other way, they went through the Red Sea, and they've seen miracles and many other things that happened, but they took them the long way. So this is the map that shows this. That was most likely the route that they took from Goshen in Egypt through the wilderness of the Red Sea, through the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the Red Sea, and all the way down to Jebel al-Lawz, which is Mount Sinai. And we'll talk about that later. Getting ahead of myself. There's just a picture of some desert travelers. I'm sure it probably has nothing to do with Israel or Jews, but I really like the picture. Thought it looks cool. Look at the pyramid. That's awesome. Anyway, we need to know the last 5 kings of Judah. Remember, we had a united kingdom. We had Israel as a united front. We had 3 different kings. We started off with King Saul. Then we went to King David. Then we went to King Solomon. And after that was King Rehoboam. But during King Rehoboam's rule, the kingdom was split. It was split because of a bad policy decision by King Rehoboam. And now we have Judah, which went south. Israel, which went north, okay? And we're going to learn about the kings of Judah, at least now. We're only going to focus on the last 5 kings of Judah. And who can say all 5 kings without looking? Ready? Go. All right. The last 5 kings of Israel, of Judah, were Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. And then after that was about 586 BC, the destruction of the temple. And I have actors needed. I think that was for the lesson last week, and I didn't even use any actors. We just kind of talked about it. So ignore that. All right, first question. Egypt allied with who against the rising Babylonian power in between 610 and 595 BC? And the answer is the Assyrians. All right, and remember, this is just a review. Which king was killed by an arrow hit to the head at the Battle of Megiddo? And the answer is Josiah. Awesome. Which son was next in line after Josiah died in the Battle of Megiddo? Well, if you look at our list, Josiah, then Jehoahaz. So if I remember the list, you know it had to be Jehoahaz. All right, next. This is just a picture of Megiddo. Why do I need Megiddo? Because here it says which son was next in line after Josiah died in the Battle of Megiddo. Well, Josiah died here. He died in Megiddo, and they just named it the Battle of Megiddo, obviously because that's just the place where it was. So Josiah died in Megiddo. Remember that. And that's just a cool picture of an Apache because that's what I worked on when I was in the military, and I just thought it was cool. It also represents war. So that's probably what I was thinking. Again, there's just a list. Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. Last 5 kings. If you say it enough, you'll remember it. Which son was placed by Necho, the Egyptian pharaoh at the time, to be the king of Judah over his son Jehoahaz? Well, it's going to be the next king in line. The next king, next child, was Jehoiakim. So Josiah had many sons. How many sons did Josiah have altogether? I don't know. Sorry I brought that question up because I don't know the answer to it. Probably look it up later. The kingdom of Judah remained under Egypt control until what battle and when? Battle of Carchemish. And we have a map that we're going to show where Carchemish was. 2 Kings 24 2 Kings 24 verse 1 says, something, king of Babylon, came up and Jehoiakim became his servant. And the answer is, you have to remember to pause. And that was horrible. All right. We have, there's Karshemish up top here. Megiddo was down here. It was north of Jerusalem in this area here. And Karshemish is farther north up in Assyria territory. All right. And more pictures of battle. Because remember, these are battles that we're talking about. And again, I just like this picture. 2 Kings 24:7 describes Egypt not supporting King Jehoiakim. Egypt not supporting King Jehoiakim's rebellion, even though Egypt promised support to Judah previously against Babylon. And this is a true or false question. And the answer is true. Basically, Egypt said that they were going to support Israel, and then they changed their mind. Egypt actually did this twice in our study. When King Jehoiakim dies, he was succeeded by his blank-year-old son, Jehoiakim. And the answer is 18. And this is just a picture of the Babylonian Empire during this time. And it says approximately 606 to 536 BC. And this was the entire empire. Just a map. All right. King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, decided to punish Judah by taking their young king Jehoiakim into exile, along with the prophet Ezekiel, prophet to the exiles, and replaced the king with Jehoiakim's uncle Zedekiah. Remember, and that's the last king of Israel. He was a pawn king. He was placed there by the king of Babylon. That happens today when the United States went into Iraq. There were certain people that were put in place. Well, these people that were put in place were people that the United States wanted to be in place, and they did things to influence these decisions. This happens all the time. That's just another isolated event. All right. The new pharaoh in Egypt, Hophra, Greek name Apries, promised support for Judah against who? And encouraged them to rebel by sending envoys to Egypt that they might give him horses and many troops. So this is the second time that it happened. They were going to help Israel, but they changed their mind again. Egypt backed out. It's kind of like having a friend, and they say they got your back, and then when you get into a situation, they change their mind. Anybody got friends like that? Don't raise your hand. Don't point. Don't point. Stop pointing, Antonio. Stop pointing, Rachel. Anyway, sorry, couldn't help it. And bad PowerPoint. All right, Ezekiel and Jeremiah predicted that Pharaoh Hophra would not be able to help King Zedekiah in the war against Babylon. Got to work on my PowerPoint skills. Don't agree. All right, this is a different question. This question is about the evidence for the Exodus in the documentary that we watched about 3 weeks ago. It was several different reasons or different evidence about modern day evidence that we have found that supports the claim that there was an Exodus, and also supports the claim that there were Canaanites that lived during a certain time, and they also lived in Egypt. So this is what this evidence is. So claim number one, you need to know these without notes. Claim number one is evidence of Canaanites living in Goshen. And Goshen is in Egypt. And this is modern day evidence that we found, archaeologists have found. Number two, inscriptions on Egyptian tombs of Hebrew slaves. 3, slave names on Egyptian writings were Hebrew names. That's very interesting. 4, Moses' path from Egypt to Midian. He lived in Midian for 4 years. I think this is more evidence about what path was taken to Mount Sinai. So, because there are conflicting stories about the path that was taken. The one that I agree with is the one that we are talking about here, but just to note, there are other claims that there are other possible places where the actual Mount Sinai was. Chariot wheel formations of coral reef in the Gulf of Aqaba. And this one is, you have to watch it. Some people say chariot wheel formation, that's ridiculous, but coral reefs take years to grow and to develop. And what they found at the bottom of this particular sea were, it looks like this area where the coral reefs were, they looks like it was disturbed. It looks like there were something happened. It looks different than the other areas of the sea. And also they look at some of the coral reefs, and it looks like the coral reefs actually grew around these chariot wheels, or the wheels. You can't necessarily say they were chariot wheels, but they actually grew around these wheels and these other structures that were, like the chariots. Because if you know what happened, all of Pharaoh's army was drowned in the sea, along with all their chariot wheels and their chariots. I forgot how many. I don't want to say a number, because I'm probably wrong, because I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head. So anyway, these are the 5 pieces of evidence. Can you remember this? Ready? What is it? Evidence of Canaanites living in Goshen. Inscriptions on Egyptian tombs of Hebrew slaves. Slave names on Egyptian writings were Hebrew names. Moses' path from Egypt to Midian, because he lived there. He lived in Midian for 40 years. Chariot wheel formations by coral reef in the Gulf of Aqaba. And we're almost to the end. Last 5 kings of Israel, from 609 BC, Battle of Megiddo, to 605 BC, the Battle of Carchemish. Judah was under the control of Egypt. That's important to note. So for 4 years, Judah was under the control of Egypt. And a lot of people don't know about history. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that more later. 2 Kings 24:1. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant. That's in the scripture. This is just a overview of this part of history. 721, the Assyrians overtake the northern kingdom. 612, the Babylonians overtake the Assyrians. 605, 597 to 586, the Babylonians overtake the southern kingdom. And look, we just learned from 609 to 605, Judah was under the control of Egypt. I don't really have that over here. So that's somewhere in between 605 and, that's someplace, is right before the Babylonians overtake the southern kingdom. So they were actually under the control of Egypt first, and then at 605 they were under control of the Babylonians. Josiah died in about 609 BC. We know what battle that was. That was the Battle of Megiddo. Jehoahaz was deposed by Necho. Deposed mean he was basically put out, and another king, Jehoiakim, was placed. This is just kind of a quick overview. Jehoiakim, 18-year-old in exile. But remember, he was placed there after Jehoiakim. So Jehoiakim is the young king, 18-year-old. And he went to exile. Remember, he went also to exile with Ezekiel, was also in exile. So Ezekiel was a prophet in exile during the exile period. Zedekiah, and he was Uncle Egypt puppet king. That was just my quick way of remembering who Zedekiah was. And 586 BC is destruction of the temple. And hopefully everyone is remembering all this. This is just a quick visual. I already talked about this. This is Egypt plus the Assyrians. I said they were actually in kind of a connection against the Babylonians, and it didn't work several times. Here, this is just more maps, and I think we're almost done. And this is new. Ezekiel's 7 oracles against Egypt. This is something that you get a little homework and you get to read. Pharaoh, the Nile monster. Nebuchadnezzar's reward. Day of judgment. Pharaoh's broken arms. Egypt and the fate of Assyria. Feast of the birds. Egypt's descent to Sheol. These are different prophecies in the book of Ezekiel, because we know that Ezekiel was the prophet in exile. He prophesied against Egypt. Wow. And these were just the different names of those different prophecies or oracles against Egypt, which is very important. So, and this is just an overview of the different Torah portions. Beshalach, when he sent, this is the Torah portions in, what is this? This is the next Torah portions. And I think this is a great place to end, because this is really not relevant in our study now. And this represents all of the Torah portions. And remember, just a quick overview of all the Torah portions. Basically, every year we read through the Torah. And we start at Bereshit and we end at Vizot HaBrakah. And this is all the way through the year. And we start over. We just continue. There are 12 in Genesis, 12, 11, 10, 10, 11. And we just study the Torah. And this is awesome. This is what we do. We'll do this for the rest of our lives. Jews everywhere do this all the time. Christians as well. Many Christians are catching on, and they're doing this as well. And I think it's awesome that we have the opportunity to do this study. So I think we'll end here. So study, 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 and study some more. And also for this particular test, we need to know as many of the names of Exodus as possible. And of, I think that's it, just of Exodus. You need to know as many names. So Shemot, Ve'era, Bo, Beshalach, Yithro, Mishpatim, Teruma, Tetzaveh, Kitisa, Vayekel, and Pekudai. And hopefully you know those, and we are ready to do something else. Thank you very much.